Oh, hello there. My name is Liah. I was once a really hard-working engine that worked on the island of Sodor. However, my life was cut short due to a tragic accident that cost a whole lot of lives and a branch line to close. However, that's not just that. My story evolves around another engine, an engine who was part of Sodor's history, but he has been forgotten, just like me. This is my story. I was built in 1900 with the sole purpose of working on Sodor. I was a completely experimental locomotive and was a different kind of engine, though I was steam, of course. I was a mix of a German and American and British locomotive with an American cab, and I was painted in a lovely Victorian livery. During my testings, I proved to be very well and was put on service in 1900. A few months after I was commissioned, I would be transported over to Sodor, which was not that long of a journey, as I was the first engine ever to be built at Barrow and Furness, the part which connects the mainland, British Railways as is now known, to Sodor. My experimental number was 0000. At that time, as you may all know, Sodor was just made up of small other railways. The Sodor Mainland Railway, and of course, the Kirk-Rennell branch at that time. I was sent to work on the Kirk-Rennell branch, which I would serve for many years. The Kirk-Rennell was my home. I loved it here on Sodor. I couldn't think of anywhere else to be. I was the biggest engine on the Kirk-Rennell branch, and I pulled many other trains. Goods trains, mine trains, passenger trains, you name it, I pulled it. However, it wasn't just me on the line at that time. There were several other engines. A cheerful, friendly coffee pot called Glyn, and 3 Victorian-style engines just like me, Colin, Lily, and Adam. Colin was a cheerful chap, while Lily was a very wise engine, an engine that I grew accustomed to, because at that time we were the only female engine on the line, and then Adam was a kind, caring soul who did everything to help us out. However, our branch line wasn't complete without our controller at that time, Mr. Billy Dennis. Mr. Dennis was a very, very kind soul, and we enjoyed him very much. He was a very caring person who took great pride in us engines, and we were very happy to serve to such a great man. I had to admit I had a kind of crush on the guy, because he was such a really useful manager, just as we were really useful engines. I was very popular with the passengers, and even though I was the biggest, I didn't boast. I just wanted to do my work in perfect order. Mr. Dennis was very proud of me. He even said that I was his special engine. I was touched by this, but didn't let it go to my head. Me and the other 4 engines grew up together on that railway, and the Kirk-Rennell was our home. But, I'm sorry to say, things didn't go the way they should have. In 1912, Mr. Dennis died of heart failure. It was a terrible tragedy to us engines. We were his pride and joy. I was hit the hardest, as I was the one who had to take his body to the local harbor, who will be sent to the mainland, where he will want to be buried. I didn't protest, saying that he would rather be buried on Sodor. I had to do what's best for the man. After that, our railway wasn't the same, after our new controller stepped in. Mr. Dennis's death would cause many problems for us engines, particularly me. It was a huge blow to the branch line. What could we do to make this all go away? I'm sorry to say, our new controller didn't even make things better. and this controller was way different than Mr. Dennis. Gerald Falkingham was nothing like Mr. Dennis. Unlike Mr. Dennis, who took great care in our railway, Mr. Falkingham didn't know how to run a railway and was only into money and greed. Looking back, I was terrified of that man. He would always scold us if we didn't do our jobs properly, and would even threaten to scrap us. Threatened, I say, to scrap us. I was horrified. How could such controllers speak to us in that kind of manner? To him, we were just machines. But to Mr. Dennis, we were actually hard-working locomotives. Mr. Dennis didn't care. All he cared about was making money. Over the next few months, the Kirkwood branch slowly fell into disrepair due to how many times Mr. Falkingham disobeyed us. He didn't take good care of us. That all changed, however, when a new engine was brought in to help in the Kirkwood branch. This engine was painted silver and was an LB and SCR E2 tank engine. He was numbered 0, and he was a very kind engine, and an engine that we all grew to trust. His name, as you may all know, was Timothy. He was one of the most kindest engines you could ever meet, and me and Lily quickly grew fond of him. He was a very hard worker, just like me, and we were double-head trains together. However, that wasn't the case with Mr. Falkingham. Timothy was slightly older than me, and cost more money. This gave Mr. Falkingham a whole lot of troubles. He and Timothy never got along. The two would argue for hours on end. And I have to say, some of the words Mr. Falkingham said to Timothy were unapproved. He called Timothy words like a mongrel, scoundrel, and downright idiot. I was furious by this. Timothy said, however, that he had to take it on his own. How wrong he was, however. In January of 1913, due to the Kirkwood unpopularity, all because of Mr. Falkingham, he lost money and was forced to step down as controller from the Kirkwood branch. This gave us a whole lot of problems because some of us had to be sent to different railways. Timothy was sent back to the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway, and Colin was also sent to work on the main line alongside me, leaving Lily, Adam, and Glenn to work on the line. At this point, the island of Sodor was hoping of expanding its railways, and so me and Colin were brought in to help on the line. Even though I was 13 years old, I still proved to be a very working engine, as I always wanted to be, and I was kept in pristine condition to work on the line. I had never felt so well in my life. I felt like I was on top of the world, but didn't want it to go to my head, so all I did was do my work with great precision. And I met a lot of new engines too. However, things only got worse. Mr. Falkingham was the controller of Sodor at that time, and our trouble started once more. Even worse, though. He hired inexperienced crew members to drive us engines. Except me, however, as my crew was highly experienced, and they never left him. They didn't trust Falkingham. This caused me and Falkingham to have a rather unpleasant relationship. I didn't have any accidents at this time, but I was forced to help out because several others suffered accidents, including Colin. Me and Colin were desperate to find out what can we do to get rid of Mr. Falkingham. But at that time, we just did our work. And Mr. Falkingham would just go around making his money. At that time, however, Sodor was increasingly going in debt because of the people not trusting the railway because of the accidents. Still, the railway needed to grow, and we were forced to work. as Mr. Falkingham watched us. An evil man. We tried everything in our power to please him, but he wouldn't believe in us. I remember one time, he even called me a piece of molten scrap metal. I'm glad to say Timothy did return in December 1913, and we reunited. And soon enough, we became best friends. Once again. Timothy also proved to be a hard worker, always doing his work, despite of his age. I loved him, and I'm sorry to say I didn't tell him this, as he was a really useful engine. I liked his personality, because even though he said he only did a little work, he was considered a big deal, which was kind of like me in some kind of way, and we became firm friends. Timothy even called me the female of the world. I was touched by this as well, and he gave me memories of Mr. Billy Dennis, original controller. However, things returned when Mr. Falkingham saw Timothy. I remember that. The first time they laid eyes on each other. It was the day that Timothy arrived on Sodor. Mr. Falkingham gave us a dirty look and walked away. In the weeks to come, I would experience dreadful conversations, or witness them, between Timothy and Mr. Falkingham. Sometimes it would be Mr. Falkingham who would be the most serious and aggressor. Timothy, the way I saw it, he was just a mere joke to him. No, he wasn't. He was a really useful engine, and I trusted him. Mr. Falkingham didn't. I even learned that one time he even spit at Timothy, saying that he would never be a really useful engine. Several nights, me and Timothy would just talk about what we could do to stop Mr. Falkingham and his greediness, and to stop treating us like slaves. Timothy didn't come up with anything, saying that we just had to do our work. I'm very sad that we didn't do anything, however. It was him that did something. Something I will never forget. It was 1914, May 24th to be exact. A day I would never forget. I was shunting in the yards near Marin, where I overheard a conversation between Timothy and Mr. Falkingham. What I heard was most awful. After Timothy would take a late-night passenger train that very same night, Mr. Falkingham would send him to be scrapped. I was shocked and enraged. How could Mr. Falkingham scrap a really useful engine just like Timothy? After Timothy had left, scowling at him, I begged and demanded that Mr. Falkingham take that idea off. But you know what he did? He scolded me. He yelled at me. He said, "You shut up, you little scoundrel. If you say anything about this, you'll be scrapped too." I was horrified. He had threatened to scrap me yet again. I kept my mouth shut for the rest of the day, until that night. Timothy's final night alive. That night, me and Timothy had a long conversation. I begged him to not do this. Timothy only looked at me, and he said something I would never forget. "Liah, please. I'll do this by myself. It is something I need to do." With that, we said our final goodbyes, and he puffed away to the docks. It was the last time I ever saw him alive. The next day, I was still wondering about Timothy's overall demise, while I was sent to take a breakdown train. What I was told was that a train had fallen over the viaduct. I was shocked. An engine going over the viaduct? Who could it be? And was he killed? What I saw was most horrifying. An engine and 2 coaches had plummeted into the ravine below. All 37 passengers and the 2 crew members were killed, along with the engine himself. Bodies were strewn everywhere. It's a sight I would never forget. And then came the worst shock of all, and the worst horror I've ever imagined. I was set to take the engine, or whatever was left of him, to the scrapyard. When I looked at the engine, nothing was left of him. It was just a gutted, wretched metal part of a boiler, and nothing else was pretty much left of him. Then I looked on the side tank. I saw a slight tint of silver and a blurred vision of a number 0. Obviously, it was Timothy. And I was also shocked to learn that Mr. Falkingham, our controller, was among the dead. I had thought of what Timothy said to me the night before, and I came out with a dreadful thought. Had Timothy committed suicide? To this day, even though I too am dead, I still wonder what happened that night. I burst into tears, knowing that Timothy had done the ultimate evil. I still liked the guy, though. And now Falkingham was dead, our controller. Even though it was pretty much a good thing, it was a bad thing for our railway. In a time where war was just about to begin with us and Britain and Germany, we didn't know what to do. So in July of 1914, when World War I started, we met our new controller, and he was a much better person than Mr. Falkingham. His name was Sir Richard Topham Hatt, who became known as the first Fat Controller. He had actually known about steam trains, and he had built Glynn, and so he was a very, very pleasant soul, and he set about making our railway a better place. In January 1915, he sent me to work on a new branch line that was currently under construction. The branch line was known as the Farquhar to Horisafflyn branch line. What is Horisafflyn? Horisafflyn was a small town on Sodor by the Sudricks. It was a nice, pleasant town, and people need to know how to get away to Farquhar. So, Sir Tom Hatt decided at that time that he would build a railway from Farquhar to Horisafflyn. There would be a huge station, and past that, it would just be a small bridge connecting that line to Marin. I was overly enjoyed when I was learned that I would be working on the line as one of its main engines. And 3 other new engines were also sent to work on the line. One was an engine that I thought was very similar to that of Timothy. He was silver, and was also an experimental locomotive, though he was a tender engine, me being a tank engine. His name was Indiana, and we grew up to be firm friends. The other was a rather shy furnished railway K2 called Tiger. He was a very kind engine too, however he was very shy. Me and Indiana just grew up to be along with him. And we also met Tiger's brother, Edward, who became known as one of the most famous engines on Sodor. And we met the Thomas the Tank Engine himself when he arrived along with Edward in 1915. He was a rather cheeky engine, always willing to work, but I liked the guy. He reminded me a lot of Timothy. I didn't tell him about what happened to Timothy, though, as I knew he and Timothy were brothers. To this day, I still regret not telling him. The passenger service to Horisafflyn was quite simple. I would run a passenger train to the large station, where actually there was a bar and another in a yard, where some of the engines were rest before heading back with the return train. And then an engine from Marin would take the train over to Vickerstown. And then on the return trip, the Vickerstown engine would take the train back to Horisafflyn, where I would take it back to Farquhar. Me, Indiana, and Tiger grew up on the line, and I was the oldest and most experienced engine. and I relayed the information, and us three became firm friends. However, it all changed on February 25th. I remember it very well, as it was the day I lost my life. It was November 25th, 1916. It was one of those nights I would take the passenger train. Me and 5 coaches were loaded up with passengers, and we set off into the night. I whooshed through the line, running at great speed. And the passengers were happy I was pulling their train. I was still a popular entrant that time. As I rushed down the line, I didn't know that this would be my final night alive. I was soon approaching the station. The lights were flickering, and there was fog in the air. As I was about to arrive at the station, I heard a noise. It was the sound of my brakes failing. They had failed. I was out of control. I didn't know what to think. I was in a blind panic. I just whimpered in tears. My crew tried desperately to stop me, but it wasn't no use. I rushed past the station, the passengers screaming at me to stop. There was no time to react. I didn't stop in time. My brakes had failed. I let out one final scream. I was killed instantly, along with all 50 passengers on the train that night. My crew, which has served me since I was built in 1900, were also killed instantly. It was the worst disaster at Soro's history at that time. However, due to the war, it was covered up, and the branch line was closed, the station abandoned. And now it is known as the Farquhar branch. However, Horisafflyn is still there, it's just not by the railway anymore. Now I just wander these parts. I wander around the station that was built. Indiana Tiger was sold to different railway companies. I'm sorry, I died, which eventually caused him to leave. Now, I'm dead. I wander these routes, weeping, crying, wanting someone to comfort me. No one. Timothy was dead, and now I am dead. It didn't have to end like this. Mr. Falkingham made my life a living hell, and even though he was dead before I died, nothing could change it. Timothy was also dead. Now I just wander around. I hope someone will recognize me, as I'm a forgotten engine. My name is Liya, engine of the Farquhar and Horisafflyn branch line. Goodbye, my friends.